Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Growth Show. Before we kick off today, I just wanted to say thanks for all the support. And we thought it'd be a good idea to run a few sort of private groups or Zoom calls with the community. So if you're interested in that, write out to us. I'll put some details at the bottom of this video, how you can contact us. And what we'll be keen to do is get really into the nitty gritty of questions you have, and sort of main one topics at a time we can really sort of attack in a sort of community environment. We feel good and have some live Q&As. So if you're interested in that, drop us a line. That'd be great to get to know you guys a bit better. But today, by popular demand, we are going into failure and how to recover from failure, which is something some of us are sadly experiencing at the moment and some aren't. So, David, what's your advice for picking yourself up from failure?
Well, it depends what kind of failure we're talking about. If it's a sort of small project that goes wrong, the best thing to do is review it, look at it, pull the bones apart on it, and learn lessons from it. It's never a failure if you learn something from something, really. There's no such thing as failure, it's just feedback. And you're just going to learn a whole load of things that are going to help you and your business get a lot stronger. Now, if we're talking about a sort of far bigger failure, like your company's struggling, you're going under, bankruptcy, you've got to lay off a whole load of staff or whatever, that is a far, far bigger thing in a sense of the emotional toll it'll take on you and everything else. A few years ago, I was working with a really good friend of mine. To say it ended disappointingly would be an understatement, and left me with about £5 in the bank and 2 weeks to try and work out how to pay my rent and stuff. And I'm still owed tens of thousands of pounds from that. And so just to make this kind of really personal, that the shame of it was the hardest thing of, being involved in something that was successful on the surface of it. It was making money, bringing money in. And yet internally, I knew it wasn't right. I was not getting paid. I was not getting what I should have done. And that led to huge emotional challenges. And so the biggest thing I'd say to someone in that is, in the sort of British public, we don't like talking about failure and we don't like talking about feelings. Please talk to somebody. Reach out to somebody and just ask for help. There'll be a whole load of people out there who will happily help. I didn't ask for any help for months. I spent a few months in the flat on my own, which is not good for mental health and not good for anything. So the first bit of advice I'd say is just ask for help. Just get out there. There'll be loads of people who, reach out, pick you up, do things like that. I'd also just say, get past the shame of it. Like you're not going to be the first business that's going to go under. Was it 87% of businesses fail in the first 2 years? It's horrible. It is really bad. But you're not alone in it. And the last thing I'd say is keep yourself busy. If we're going down the sort of extreme end of failure, what we perceive to be failure, and the vast majority of successful entrepreneurs that I know have had at least one big failure on the resume. It's almost a prerequisite of then having success. So hopefully that softens it in the midst of it a little bit. Please reach out to one of us. I'm sure we'd happily chat to you. But I think in terms of just that initial bit, would just go out and just speak to people, because you won't be alone.
Yeah. And you'll be amazed how many people have gone through similar experiences. And once you've been through it once and come out the other side, it is so much more comforting to know, it's possible. But the weight of when that first initial impact, or that surprise impact of a big failure, the temptation is just to roll up into a little ball and hide yourself from the world, and it's not healthy on any scale. And Tom, what would you add to that?
I think I would challenge the word failure. I think there's a level of challenge, and actually, even if you're closing a business, I don't see that necessarily as being a failure. Sometimes that can be a good outcome in terms of saving money and enabling a clean break onto something else. So I think just picking up on the words, pick yourself up after failure is actually a negative generalization, and actually just to there's actually no answer to that question, oddly enough. We need to be a bit more specific, as David said, but I think it's also a negative generalization, which means it's flawed fundamentally. And that creates stasis. So just in terms of the detail of the question, I think the other thing which David mentioned is should failure be in our vocabulary? Does it exist? I think the other thing is, it depends what type of failure. When I was thinking about failure, I was, in terms of, you've got the collapse of businesses where pride's a real issue, and pride stops you from actually seeing the issue and admitting to the problem, which is a big problem. But actually, there are other sort of intermediate types of failure when someone might tell you something you don't want to hear. And our typical reaction to that is to reject it or label it or say, Nick is this or David is that, rather than actually take the time to actually understand specifically what that person's referring to. And I think that's particularly important if you're feeling a bit proud or if you're in a sort of communications breaking down a bit. I think the other thing is if someone's delivering bad news to you, ask yourself the question, have they got your best interests at heart? Which rather sort of brings me to the Brexit negotiations. But anyway, that's a bit of a distraction. So I think the other side of this is around, the metaphor of dropping your guard with Tyson. The only time you notice you've dropped your guard is when Tyson smacks you on the chin, which certainly I'd imagine could do damage, right? And I think that the large part of failure is actually preparing yourself for it, if there is such a thing, and making sure you're strong. And I think particularly if people are not as busy as they used to be, particularly for men who I think it's very important, work is really important to our well-being. It's very important not to become victims and blame things and take responsibility for the situation. But also for young men, certainly for myself, I used to definitely think I was indestructible. In fact, I still think I'm a young man and indestructible now. But I've learned, you need to have more energy than the challenge you're facing. So, if something hits you, you've got to make sure you've got more energy than, and actually you need to look after your physical fitness, practically go to bed early, which that all sounds very dull. I don't drink anymore. I learned drinking wasn't good for me. Eating healthy food and actually having a laugh and drinking water, oddly enough, is rocket fuel for me. So I think you've got to prepare yourself. I think the other thing is physically as well. I mean, I train quite hard, and I think I've learned a lot by pushing myself to the limit of what I can do. I learned a lot about quite early on in my career. And I think if you've done that, it really, I don't suggest people do that on a mental level, but certainly physically. I think if you're physically stronger, you become mentally stronger. And I think the other thing I'd just add to this is to say that actually, if you're taking a hit, you need to know what your purpose is. So it's a bit like a Weeble, I think there's a danger at the moment that people are beginning to lose themselves with the amount of interaction and sort of manipulation that goes on social media and stuff. And it's increasingly important to do things in your own way and avoid social media. So I think that's what I'd initially contribute to the discussion.
Okay, yeah. I've definitely seen the biggest danger around this is the compounding effect of pride and doing nothing. And that's from high levels to someone starting out a job who might have made a mistake and sort of being nervous or shy to what they're doing, or dwelling on it and actually just delaying their ability to get going again and sort of get back on the bike is something I see a lot of. That knock-on impact. And the worst thing you can do is just dwell on it. You've sadly got to, if you're worried about you're going to run out of money because something's failing, probably the best thing to do is have a little think, have a little reflection time, run some scenarios, but then get back on, get back going, and get back out there before it becomes a habit and before you start denting confidence even more. Is David, is running scenarios a good thing? Is sort of planning, with the idea of almost planning for failure to know how you would respond to it, can you run scenarios around it? Can you sort of train your brain around it?
100%. And there's two really good exercises that I do. The first one is, if you have a fear about the worst case scenario, set a timer on your phone for 2 minutes and just sit with the worst case scenario. Just focus on that worst case scenario. Because what happens is it's usually our fear that affects our behavior isn't rational. So if you fixate on that kind of worst case scenario, what happens is the brain starts to recalibrate and go, okay, let's say worst case scenario is the business goes under. I'll get a job. In fact, I've got loads of friends who will keep offering me jobs. So, I'll be okay. Or I can, worst case, I can move back in with my parents, or I can move in with a friend and get myself back. And the brain starts to recalibrate itself, but it's that fear of the unknown that doesn't really, that just holds us in a place. So if you spend some time actually sitting with it, that fear will start shrinking because it's not usually based on anything real. The second thing to do, if you're wanting to avoid a failure that could come up ahead of you, is I get clients to run pre-mortems. So you sit in a room, you're right, everybody, we're going to fast forward 6 months. This project has been a complete and utter train wreck. Everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong, hasn't delivered, it's gone over budget, it's whatever, right? And then go, why did that happen? And usually everyone just starts out the reasons. Oh, we didn't have clear communication at the start. Oh, there were delays because there's inefficient workloads. Oh, it was unrealistic expectations at the beginning with. Oh, we should have just built this bit first. That would have, and suddenly you get all the answers coming out before. The subconscious brain is a phenomenally powerful thing. It really, and suddenly you get a whole load of learning that completely changes the trajectory, and also allows people to engage in that process. So again, as a leader, it's a really good engaging process and a great way to listen to people straight from the off.
Yeah, I love that. I think approaching every project on let's pick up the flaws, especially as humans, we're very good at picking holes in things, right? I find we're a lot better in, most people I know are much better at finding the negatives in things than the positives in things. So it sounds like a great place to start to actually just roadmap the issues that could be coming down.
Yeah, and what always happens at the end of a project is you always get a few people over a couple of beers that go, yeah, I kind of knew that it was going to end up like this because this. It's like, well, why didn't you say so? And that's a great way of getting out early. We intrinsically know a lot of where the obvious problems are going to come from before we do something. But it's, just getting everyone on the right footing right from the off is incredibly powerful.
Yes, yeah. Tom, have you implemented things like that when you've been turning around businesses before?
Yeah, I use different words, David, but I think the way, put it another way, just to add to what David said, I think there's some warning signs we need to be aware of. One is pride. The sign of pride is intellectualizing things, and which turns into a sort of intellectual "I'm right, you're wrong" type discussion. And you can pick that up. The second thing, and that's a sign you can't cope, actually, oddly enough. So that creates stasis in its own right. So some of the statements that David was making in terms of rationalizing situations and justifying situations, that's all a sign of not being able to cope. The second thing is language. So generalizations normalize things. So saying things like, everybody's got a pension scheme deficit, therefore it's okay. That creates stasis. So, and these are all signs, Nick, of actually not being able to cope, right? And so this is when things are getting too much, and this is what people do when they start processing information. And I think what's great, I mean, what I focus on is putting relationships back together to open up the dialogue, because it's only by putting relationships back together you can actually get people speaking freely. And I think actually when you do face the real situation, which is normally demonstrated with cash flow is a zero bullshit environment. How much money you've got in the bank, Nick, is absolutely how much money you have in the bank, and there's and the cash is very much the lifeblood of a business. So I think when you get cash flow, which is the equivalent of, in a financial setting, of what David just described as facing your worst fear, actually you know what to address, and then you can get a team around that to cascade that through the organization. I think simple practical things as well, actively taking interest in people. So practically, if someone stops me, I don't care who they are, how busy I am, I will always stop and make time for people. I'll take an interest in trying to understand where they're coming from, and take an interest in them as well. So if they say something to me that I frankly completely disagree with, or actually don't understand, I'll make every effort to understand that, and then I've got an ally, right, who will never ever let me down, and they will come and tell me everything. And in just doing that, by setting that example. I think the other thing is there are times when businesses are flawed, and it's worth accepting that. And I think the thing that struck me when I was thinking about this call was it's all about health. And Churchill said that if you're going through hell, don't stop, right? And I think there's a rule. We as human beings, we can't stop. But at the same time, if we find, well, actually, I'd add something to that, which is we need to take new action. So by doing more of the same, it's not going to deliver a different outcome. So, but if we find we're taking new action and it's still not working, right, then you've got to question whether or not your business is viable. And I think that is certainly an issue at the moment. And I think as well, we really have got to accept the fact that we don't, that a lot of education is about self-reliance, and actually we are highly reliant on relationships and our well-being. If you take a knock, Nick, who do you go and speak to? Who do you pick up the phone? Who's your mates? I go out for a drink on a Wednesday night with a friend of mine, and we just go out to the pub. And who do you go and speak to? Where do you, where are your relationships? And where's that network of people that are really interested in Nick and really take an interest in you, Nick? And I think we can adopt that same thing. So I think there's a few simple steps. I think I tried to capture this in a sort of metaphor of a jazz band, which works intimately, listens to customers intimately, and it's about getting this dialogue right. I think it's also worth just watching out if you do find you're on a downhill path, which I certainly have been, and I find myself on a downhill path, and I pick myself up as I recognise this. It's when you start blaming things, or you're not taking full responsibility for things, and what that leads to is not caring, and not caring is a very dangerous situation to be in, and that unravels. And I think not caring and keeping quiet is the most deadly thing. So you flip that on your head and take a real interest in other people and care about them, and if you do nothing else, then that actually is goes about 99% of where we need to get to, I think. But I would add, though, there are situations where it's important to stop businesses, shut businesses down. I don't see that as a failure. I don't really understand the word failure. Perhaps I ought to, but it's a negative generalisation. I think it's a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah. And interesting point came up there. I think in our lives we all know someone who loves to blame others, right? Who comes across as incapable of maybe taking sort of responsibility. And they might be in your team, there might be other founders, so usually they're quite strong. They're usually very good at what they do, actually, these people, with the amount of self-belief they have. But where do we start in sort of tackling them, helping them sort of step into a form of reality?
I was talking to one this morning, or a director of a business this morning, and they had a challenge of wasn't this individual I was speaking to, but their boss and their behaviour when they were coming under pressure of micromanagement and getting caught in a trap of actually they're trying to raise funding for their business, which stopped them doing other things like making money and getting the team working properly. And this was a downward spiral. So the answer to that was actually to address this. And this is a very bold, very wealthy investor, very confident, very proud individual. And I think you need to change the dialogue for this, Nick. And this is why I run the Winning Thinker process, to completely change the dialogue, to get people down to human level, and then start rebuilding relationships, taking new action, understanding, resetting relationships to take this forwards. Because you simply, unless you, in my experience, if you faced with a critical situation like that, you simply won't. So you might try. So one of the warning signs today was this guy who I know really well, is a really good friend of mine, very senior vice president of a big US firm historically, so a really heavy hitter. He was saying he presented the facts to this individual, right? This is typical, and got nowhere because you're not fixing the right problem. Yeah, and that's a catch-22 situation. So unless you nip that in the bud, and that is actually good business, which is on the verge of failing, but we can catch that. by doing what I've just described, to try and get the relationships back, make people aware. So actually, I think what's really exciting about this is not about telling people what to do, it's actually making great people aware of the implications of what they're doing. And then they go, I see, then take different action. And that's a very exciting place to be. And it's life-changing as well. Totally life-changing.
And David, what would you add to that?
I think sometimes it's waiting for people to sort of come and be ready to listen. I generally think people are, in terms of problems, they're open, closed, or stuck. And sometimes you see people and you go, you're heading down a path that's going to not get you where you want to get to, and it's going to. You can see the impending car crash about to happen, and if they're not willing to listen, whatever you say is not going to help, and actually it'll probably more entrench them in their view that they're right anyway until it happens. And then when it happens, they're not going to talk to you about it anyway because they're going to think you're an idiot, and you saying it probably made it happen, and they'll try and blame you for it. So I think if someone's really closed, you've just got to make sure that they know you're there when they're not closed. So when they either realise they're stuck and they need some help, or they're just wide open for a solution. And there's things that you can do to sort of nudge people on, and perhaps leave a little bread trail and things like that. But I generally think saving people from or jumping in and making sure that someone doesn't go through a painful experience doesn't actually help people. In that generally people need to learn, and it'd be great if we all learned from everyone else's failures. But then if we did that, very few businesses would fail because we'd learn from other people's failures and we never repeat them, right? But the stats don't change, so people presumably just copy everyone else's failures. And so I think part of it is you've always got to let someone go on that journey for them to come back and come back in the right way. If this is in your business and it's a critical thing, and you can see it with an employee or a team member or something like that, the best thing to do is try and do like a controlled explosion. So make sure it doesn't go too far, or the product doesn't go way beyond spec, or it's that point where we deliver to a client before it unravels. But you can kind of preempt that, put some things in place that then mean you catch it first, but someone still gets that same experience. But it's not critical to a business.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I definitely think the more forward planning you can do, the more picking holes in things early when it comes to people is good. I actually think the managing of teams in this scenario is potentially easier than the person who might be listening to this unaware that maybe they are the pride, they are the issue in here. And yes, you are right. You sort of do need to take a knock on that journey, and you've just got to hope sometimes that knock is just small enough to get you back up and going, rather than something that does set you back in a big way. We're trying to keep these sort of to 20 minutes, which is incredibly frustrating, I have to say. Like it's much more fun just to go on for hours and hours. But we'll try and keep it. Any sort of closing statements on feedback or perceived failure, David?
One of the best bits of advice that I was given on this was find people who've been in deep water. Don't go to advice, don't go to help from people who have no idea or no perspective on it. They will not be helpful at all. In fact, they'll probably, be like tying lead weights around your ankles. Find people who've been in similar positions, not least because they can empathise and they'll help and have that real human connection. So find people who've been in deep water and come out of it. And the second thing would be, it's never fatal. There's always another day. There's always a new opportunity. The vast majority of people, you look at Abraham Lincoln and how many elections he lost, all those kind of things, like overcoming adversity. The people who have long-term longevity of success usually have a long list of failures as well, and that builds emotional resilience and grit, and really helps get long-term success. If you have short-term success without a failure, you'll have a fast failure and a fast bump as well.
Yeah, actually reminds me of an Irish fellow we knew who was we'd been training for a big sporting event, got through to the final. This has been 2 years of our lives, just day in, day out, 5 a.m. till God knows what time, and we lost. And obviously the team is devastated. Haven't said a word to each other, just sat on the floor, broken in bits. And this little Irishman walks over and just goes, "But at least nobody died." And we burst out laughing. Got up, looked at each other, and went, yes. And I'll never forget that. Whatever I'm going through, it's just having that perspective of, there's a lot worse going on out in the world. It's relatively minor most of the time. Let's just get up, new day, go again. And that stayed with me forever. But Tom, any other sort of closing point from you there?
Yeah, I think just say one thing. If leaders find themselves in an intransigent position where they're just arguing and having intellectual toing and froing, I'm right, you're wrong, then stop, right? Really take an active interest in what that person is saying to you, and really take a real interest in where they're coming from a good blank sheet of paper. Just try and switch off all the noise in your head, just really understand where they're coming from and take a real active interest in them as individuals. And if you do nothing else, I think that would make a vast difference to reset relationships, and then practice that. Actually practicing that is very important, because we do get into a habit of this "I'm right, you're wrong" thing as leaders. So I think that's what I'd say. Understand about the family as well. Just laugh. Laughter is very important, because it levels out people's assumptions. It brings people on the same level immediately. So that's a very powerful tool. So probably listening to Not the 9 O'Clock News is quite good. I find that quite good.
Yeah, maybe. We always say these things. I never know how easy or hard they are, but maybe we could do some active listening, right? And just run some scenarios of how to do it, or how to become conscious of where you're getting sucked into arguments or battles, which are just, especially in a boardroom scenario where you're just wasting the people's time around you, and no one looks good in that scenario. But maybe there's something we can do around that.
I think silence, Nick, as well. There's one thing big vocalised, but silence is actually worse, because that's when you get tyranny of tolerance. So be aware of that as well.
Yeah. Our viewers would probably enjoy a bit of silence. We could just do half an hour of that, probably be our highest rated episode. No, but I think active listening or the power of silence, I think that'd be great. Mike Friday did an episode where he really, really emphasized this. So I'll put a link to that as well, because that's Mike's got some great views on that as well. But to everyone at home, thank you again. We'll put some links up for a few of the things we mentioned today. Keep those comments coming in. We really want to get a live Zoom community going. Maybe we'll try some live Q&As, sort of dare to do these live on LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever it might be. But thanks again for all your help and support, and we will see you all very soon. All the best. Goodbye.